so I get a lot of questions from friends about how much it costs me to fly, how much it costs me to get my pilot's license. And I always tell them the same thing, it's not as expensive as you think. I'm not saying it's not expensive. I'm not saying that anybody, with a minimum wage job or, anybody that doesn't plan properly, I might even say minimum wage job, let's say better. Anybody who doesn't plan properly can't fly. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's not as expensive as people think. Every time I talk to people and say, hey, how much do you think it costs to get your pilot's license? The answer I get is, oh, it's got to be $15,000 or $20,000 or, no, airplanes are $100,000, and that's not true at all. So when I got my pilot's license, I did it with under what's called Part 61. And under Part 61, what happens there is you're not with a flight school. You're with an individual who is a certified flight instructor. And that allows you a lot of leeway, and typically it does save a lot of money. And the reason it does that is because you're not paying the school. You're just paying that guy for his time. So when I did my pilot's license, for all said and done, had I paid for the whole thing, it would have cost me a total of $6,000. Now, I didn't spend $6,000. A lot of times you can actually do things for those guys like, hey, let me wash your plane for an hour of flight time. And they're more than happy to do that because then they don't have to wash their plane. They don't have to do some of the maintenance. So you can trade a lot of that type of work just for flight time, which is what I did for a lot of my flight time. The other thing is, another way to really save money is actually, believe it or not, to buy your own plane. So you can pick up something like a Cessna 150, 152, for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to, that's for one that needs a lot of work, 10,000, and one that's actually pretty good shape for about 15,000. Now for those, you're not looking at this is my forever airplane. This is my plane that I'm going to fly for, my private pilot. We'll turn it back here to the south a little bit. Now, this is what I'm going to fly for my private pilot's license. And if you take that attitude about it, you're not planning on keeping this thing forever. You're talking about keeping it for a year, 6 months. So you might have to budget for an annual, maybe, a couple of oil changes, minor maintenance. You're not talking about, hey, I'm going to keep this thing all the way to TBO. But TBO, that's time between overhaul. So, you're not talking about keeping the thing for 1,000 hours. You're talking about for maybe 100 hours of flight time at most. Now, if you do that and you work with the right flight instructor, what's going to happen is instead of paying $100 an hour to fly a Cessna 150, you're going to be operating it for more in the neighborhood of about $50 to $75 an hour, depending on cost of gas and everything else. That drastically reduces the cost of your flight training. Especially when you think about it, if you're taking a loan out to buy the aircraft, which most people would, you're talking about something in the neighborhood of about, let's say, $200 a month for the loan, and another $100 a month for just for insurance. So even with that, you're still going to save yourself a lot of money. And when I've run the numbers before, if you were to buy an aircraft like that you weren't going to keep, that you were going to sell at the end, you could realistically get your flight training done for somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4,000. So again, I'm not saying it's inexpensive, but it's not as expensive as a lot of people think it's going to be. Now, on that note, that's also why I went with experimental aviation, because this aircraft operates very inexpensively. Since I went with an aircraft engine that I built, in this case it's a Chevy Corvair engine, that also decreased my cost to fly. So because I built the engine, I can do all the maintenance, the parts are relatively inexpensive. I can operate this aircraft for somewhere in the neighborhood of about $20 an hour. Now you think about a typical certified airplane, let's say just something even like a Cherokee 140. You're not going to operate that plane for anything less than about $55 to $65 an hour. So experimental aviation is actually a very inexpensive way to get in the air. 61. Now, if you're going part 141, that's a standard flight school. Now those, what's going to happen there is you're going to get state-of-the-art aircraft. You're going to get a very structured flight training program. For some people, they need that. And if you're going into the airlines, that's actually not a bad way to go. But I'm also going to say that that's going to be a lot more expensive. On those aircraft, you're going to be leasing them out for somewhere in the neighborhood of about $170, $180 an hour. And typically, you're going to spend $15,000 to $20,000 on a private pilot certificate. Now, if you're going, if you're like I said, if you're just like me and you just enjoy flying, that's not necessarily the simplest, cheapest, or even I'd say even the best way to go. Each type of school has its own purpose. One thing I liked about Part 160 or Part 61 when I flew was I knew that a lot of my cross countries were going to be to specific airports once I got my pilot's license. And it's mainly because that's where my family lives. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that when I flew and did my long cross countries and things like that, that I was going to airports which after I got my pilot's license would actually help me. So on that note, let me talk about what's actually required to get a private pilot's license. So at a minimum, you need 40 hours of flight time. Now that flight time is divided up into a couple different things. You need a minimum of 20 hours of dual instruction. That's where your instructor's sitting next to you. That's where a lot of the cost is coming in that's additional to your flying, because a typical flight instructor is going to be charging in the neighborhood of between $45 and $55, some even $65 an hour, depending on how in demand that flight instructor is. Just check for traffic. Now, on top of that dual time, you need a total of, I believe it is 6 hours of night cross country. So you're going to have some nighttime with them, you're going to have some daytime with them. Now all of your cross countries that are at night will be done dual instruction, not solo. So that's one thing there. Now, on top of that dual time, you're going to need your own solo time. So of that 40 hours, you're going to have 10 hours of solo time. So let's do the math. You need to do 20 hours of dual instruction, minimum of 10 hours of solo, which means there's another 10 hours in there, which is also going to be solo, because of the solo time, you're going to need a bunch of cross-country solo time. So it all kind of works out in the end, and it actually, once you get into it, it's actually a lot of fun, especially when you get to the solo flights, because you end up going to some really neat places. Like for me, I did my first solo cross-country was up to Blythe. I did one out to Calexico. My long cross-countries, I went from Yuma to Chandler. So a lot of interesting flying once you get to that point.